Information you might have after today as well. And so a couple of other questions. Do we have any elected officials in the room? Great. How about city employees? Awesome. Any educators, teachers, school staff, couple public health folks? Okay, great. And what about just concerned, committed community residents? Maybe everybody too? Well, great. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Olivia, and they are both, she's going to start us off with the basics of affordable housing, and then Abby is going to talk about what Middleton's efforts are for workforce housing in their community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Olivia, and she's going to get us going. So thanks for being here.
So one more question. How many people are from outside Dane County? Raise your hand. All right, cool. All right. Well, you know me. You've been seeing me all morning. What I want to do first off is take us to a video. Learning about affordable housing is a big step. It's kind of like walking off, looking off at the end of the cliff. There's so many different things, as you heard this morning, so many different aspects to it. So I just want to start off with a video that we made that tells us kind of a story that helps us kind of get on the same page in terms of what we're how we think about affordable housing, and then we'll go into some more details.
There's just not enough to go around. And they have waiting lists, very long waiting lists. You just can't afford anything more expensive, so where do you go?
So the housing gap is the difference between the amount of income that people earn, and therefore the house that they could afford, and the number of units that are available at that price point.
Well, I lived in Middleton first, and that wasn't low income, so that's why I moved. If I was living back where I used to, it would be 3/4 of my Social Security would be for housing. And I wouldn't have enough for food and phone or electric. And it's not like the elderly people that are looking for a home haven't worked through their lives. They're not freeloaders. They have worked, and they just don't have the money now to provide their living. And just look around. When you go to the store or you go out somewhere, look around and see how many elderly there are. It's growing fast, and we got to get ahead of it.
Most low-income households are working households, and they don't earn enough to have a decent quality place to live, where they can raise their family and in a safe and stable neighborhood.
So we've been together 11 years. I work for Jersey Mike Subs in Middleton. I'm an assistant manager.
And I work at American Girl in Middleton. I've been there 3 years.
We've noticed in the last 20 years that in many places across the country, housing costs have gone up much faster than people's incomes. And that puts pressure on their ability to spend money for other things.
It took us a long time to find some place that was affordable, that was nice. We didn't have a car before we moved here. I mean, everything we did was by cab, by walking, or, trying to get rides from people.
The apartment that we're living in is good, it's affordable. We're able to save a lot of money staying here because they take care of the property. We want to be here. Saved us a lot of money where we were able to afford daycare for our son. Whoa, did you like that? We were able to afford food. Believe it or not, food's expensive, so we're able to keep food in the refrigerator. We're able to go to work. Here it gives us reassurance that we're good, we're safe, we feel like a family.
We're really talking not just about making stable housing for families, but it helps to strengthen neighborhoods and strengthen our schools and stabilize our employment base.
Having employees that can live closer in to the plant is a big benefit to us. We know there's a gap in the community for affordable housing, so we're working on projects in conjunction with businesses and the city of Sun Prairie to provide affordable workforce housing.
So workforce housing is really housing that is priced to meet the needs of the workforce that you have in an area.
Tight labor market kind of forces us as a company to look outside of our general area, and it's difficult to recruit employees to want to come to work here at our plant and have to have a 40 to 45 minute to an hour commute. I believe if workforce housing is not available, it increases the turnover rate.
For many households who live far away from work, they may feel like they're saving money on their housing, but they're really spending a lot of time and money on gas and on travel. And it means that if their car breaks down, either they have to pay for their car or pay for their rent. So they might lose their job or they might lose their housing. When we have developers building new apartments that are affordable, it creates construction jobs, it creates additional jobs as people spend their money in the community.
The City of Middleton had a workforce housing committee that said we want 295 units of affordable housing over a certain time period. Having that roadmap is key for developers to know what the communities want so that they can bring the projects forward that the community is already asking for. I think the economic impact is huge. We took a vacant bowling alley on 2 acres and built a $16 million project. The city recognizes this increase in taxes while at the same time providing units at this huge range of affordability. Meadow Ridge Middleton has 76 out of 95 units that are affordable, ranging in income levels from 30% to 60% of the area median income. We've got units targeted for veterans, we've got units targeted for people that have disabilities and require supportive services. So, these projects really throw a wide, diverse net for a tenant base, which really creates, I think, personally, a better apartment community. You don't look at this building and say, hey, that's got to be an affordable housing project. This is as nice as any market rate housing project.
To fix the housing gap, we need a sustained partnership across all sectors. So for employers, that can mean helping their employees to find housing. For cities, it can mean spending money or helping to approve more apartment construction or development of affordable housing. And really for the banking and financial sector, it means financing and funding these projects.
And this is the best apartment that we've had.
It's like our own private little community where you're getting to know your neighbors so you can actually look out for your neighbors too.
I have a sign that says everyone needs a little place to call home. And I think it's so true. We don't ask for a mansion. We just ask for a little place to live.
I think that helps kind of bring many of the pieces together around this issue. What I want to do now is actually start to get into some of the specifics. Why we're in this situation, a little bit more about why we're in this situation, the basics, who, what, where, who, what, where, why, when, what does it look like, how much does it cost, and then, is there a, okay. Actually, could I use that mic on the table mic? I just have to.
Testing.
Okay. Oh, it's going to be attached. It's okay. I'll figure it out. And then we're going to look at some of the benefits and drawbacks to workforce and affordable housing, and community tools that are helpful for developing affordable housing and attracting affordable housing developers, and a quick snapshot of the Dane County housing gap. So, what is an affordable housing gap? So, as we heard in the film, number of units needed at a certain price versus the number of units available. That's the housing supply gap. We talk about a housing supply gap because it's easy to understand what you have and what you don't have, and what's missing, what you need and what's available, and the difference between it. So that's the housing gap. Why is there a housing gap? So we had a recession. It's a national crisis. It's been going on for quite a few years, but it's really peaking now, and it's making its way into the media and actually into discussions with elected officials at the national level. So as part of the Great Recession, or because of the Great Recession, we lost thousands and thousands and thousands of contractors, went out of business, retired permanently. Those retiring contractors have not come back. The subsequent development for housing has been higher income, higher end, and you note that when you look around, there's a lot of high-end housing. That's where the money is, but that's what happened as a result of, one of the things that happened as a result of the Great Recession. So we have a labor shortage of construction workers and day laborers. Then we have an increased cost of building materials in general. Wages are flat or declined in the last decade, especially for lower wage workers. Vacancy rates are historically low. Dane County communities are seeing 0 to 3% vacancy rates. For rental rates, it's typically 5%, which is an equilibrium. And I was kind of curious about this because I was born in 1964. I was like, I wonder how much a house cost in 1964. So in 1965, a house cost $20,400. The median income was $6,900. In 2019, it was $63,703 is the median income. $328,000 is the median home price. The income to home ratio was 1 to 3 in 1965. Now it's 1 to 5. So what actually is workforce housing? It's housing that costs no more, or workforce or affordable housing. It's housing that costs no more than 30% of your income. Now, I would just like to share with you workforce housing, affordable housing. I use those terms interchangeably. There's no reason not to, unless you're specifically talking about to a specific audience about housing for only a specific type. But you can't limit who lives in a home and in an apartment building that is built. You can only limit it by their income. So generally, affordable housing, workforce housing, most people have worked, and so if it's housing for if you're a senior and you need affordable housing, well, and you want to live in workforce housing, that's fine. So these terms are interchangeable, and I just wanted to let you know that that's the way we use them, at least in this program. So housing that's cost no more than 30% of your monthly income. And that calculation for homeowners is mortgage, real estate taxes, insurance, and utilities. For the renter household, it's rent and utilities. For cost burdened, it's households that spend no more than 30% of your income. And if you spend more than 50% of your income, you're considered extremely cost burdened. Now, when you're a lower income person, even spending more than 30% is difficult. But imagine spending half of your income, which is why we have heard so many of the stories that Linda shared with us this morning. So who needs affordable workforce housing? The workforce, young families and children, individuals, young adults just starting their careers, seniors with restricted income, disabled, veterans. Workforce occupations, everything from teachers, sales clerks, maintenance, janitorial staff, public safety, beginning, police, fire, prison guards, manufacturing, food processing, who's going to make our ice cream, assembly, administrative support staff, waitresses, cooks, elder care, nursing homes. There's a huge crisis in this area, and specific within healthcare for supportive care for people in their homes. Car wash attendants, baristas, agricultural workers, farm workers, warehousing, shipping, and delivery. Do any of you have any of you ever worked in one of those careers? Right. Do any of you know anybody who works in those careers? Right. 22% of our workforce in Dane County includes lower income, what we consider lower income workers. And that percentage is never going to change. People might move through it, but it's never going to change because some people don't move through it. Some people stay there for their whole careers. So how much will you pay? If you, does this have a, it does, okay. So if you are, so HUD sets up the income limits and what we can, when we talk about affordable housing, how we talk about it. So the area median income for a family of 4 in Dane County is $100,000 for $100,400. This is very high. The surrounding counties are not this high. So that means that if you're a family of 4 and you're making 80% of the area median income, you're making $75,500. The work in workforce and affordable housing is typically focuses on 60% AMI and below, although the units that are being built does allow for 80% AMI, but most of the work is emphasized on this cohort right here, these three, 60%, 50%, and 30% AMI. So if you are a single individual making $35,150, that means you could afford, with rent and utilities, to pay $878 or less in your monthly rent. These rent limits are defined by WHEDA. They come out every year, and WHEDA is the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority, the state agency that determines a lot of the work that we do, and especially the work with tax credits. So if you're a family of 2, and you're 60% AMI, and you're making $48,240 or less, you want to live in a 1-bedroom, you can pay $1,130. That's rent plus utilities or less. So that's just to give you sort of a sense of what we're talking about when we're talking about affordable housing or workforce housing. So a lot of the housing now that's being built is multifamily housing, and there's a very good reason for that. Housing costs about $170 a square foot right now, and the average 2,000 square foot home costs about $340,000. That's today's starter home. It's unreachable for most people. So multifamily is a more affordable opportunity, and really for many people, their first starter home. Multifamily housing is typically, though, something we call mixed income, which means a portion of it is market rate and a portion of it is below area median income. WHEDA, the state housing agency, likes to see a combination of market rate rentals as well as lower income, a mix of lower incomes that include some of these categories, so 60, 50, 30. They feel like it makes a better apartment community, and the people who are, the developers who are competing for the tax credits that they use in these projects put a certain percentage in. So it's a sort of it's a diverse group, just like you heard J.T. Klein talk about in his project. Below market and market rate. So existing housing, naturally occurring affordable housing, some of the 2 units, 4 units, 8 units that you've seen, that is affordable housing. You can use rehab to get affordable housing. Scattered site development is another opportunity where you actually have one developer doing a number of projects across municipalities or within one jurisdiction that are not as big, not 30 or 40 units, but maybe smaller, 4 or 8 units. Pocket neighborhoods, which I'll show you in a minute, and Habitat for Humanity, which builds about 6 or 7 homes a year in Dane County. And then other alternatives like co-housing, cooperative housing, and tiny homes. Co-housing is when people all have their own home, but there's also a shared communal space, and those are typically in much closer proximity, so they take up a lot less land, and they are typically a little smaller, so those tend to be able to be more affordable. Cooperative housing is when actually you have a home and it's lived in cooperatively with a number of people, and they cooperatively own and take care of the home. And then tiny homes, I think you've probably heard about that, the little homes on trailers. So this is just an example of a multifamily development in Madison, Park Central Apartments. It's a 3-story, I think there are well over 100 units in this building, and it kind of looks like townhomes, but it's right on our Central Park in Madison. This is another 102-unit property, kind of more spread out. It's put on a former brownfield. Looks a little bit like kind of house-like style. They're all different in design. This one on the bottom here is a 4-unit developed by Commonwealth Development, a nonprofit developer, a rehab project in Madison, multifamily attached and detached. Yeah. That's more of a sort of a townhome feel. This is a larger building, a much larger building, mixed income property in Madison, just a different design. And this is what I'm talking about when I say pocket neighborhoods. So there's this has been around for a while, but we haven't really been doing it until now. But it's the idea is that you're clustering homes, but they're very small square feet. So these are like 1,000 square foot homes, but they're clustered into small areas. So you're using less land, you're using less building materials because they're smaller homes, so they're more affordable. And I think right now we're doing one in, is it Horicon? Where's Tom? Horicon. If you're interested in finding out more about pocket neighborhoods, Tom Landgraf is in the back, and he's working on one in Horicon, Wisconsin right now. Yeah, so it's just a different design, and yeah, it's a little, probably a bit bigger than a tiny home, but quite nice looking. So this is historic preservation is another way to achieve affordable housing. This is a mixed income workforce housing project that was done by Gorman and Company out in La Crosse. I've been there. It's an amazing building, but they converted an old school. Oh no! It was a brewing. It was a brewing company. A brewing company into apartments. So if you have any older buildings, historic rehab is a really great way to get affordable workforce housing. This is Cudahy Commons, and this is south of Milwaukee. This is a rehab project of some housing that was built in the 60s or 70s. Penny Lane Apartments, there's 190, there are 112 units. I think 195 are 112 units, 95 are affordable, and the rest are market rate. And this was actually built over, this is over on Cottage Grove Road. There used to be a fertilizer factory there, so that's a rehabilitated site. So what is the difference between market rate and affordable housing? Which one costs more? Market rate? Market rate? Okay. They actually cost the same. Same labor costs, same material costs. And unless you're building a high-end luxury apartment, all the buildings cost the same. What, though, could possibly be other differences? So the market rate apartment, you don't need that much equity in a project. For an affordable unit, you need a lot of equity. If you're going to provide lower rents for individuals, you need to bring a lot more equity to the deal. Here, it's probably 15 to 30% equity you need to bring to a deal. Here, it's more like 60% or more. So, how do they do that? It's very complicated. A developer, conventional, can just go to a conventional bank. They can go to one source of financing. For a workforce or affordable housing developer, they have to go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, sometimes 8 or 9 different sources for equity, just equity alone. So it's complicated, it's more time consuming. These weighted tax credits are, you can apply for them once a year. Gap financing, the county and the city both have gap financing programs. You can apply for them once a year. Community support is very important in these projects. Developers are looking for community partnerships, whether it's TIF or land or expedited permitting, home and CDBG funds, USDA Rural Development, AHP has a fund, Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago has a fund that developers apply to. But all of affordable housing and workforce housing developers have to come in with a significant amount of equity, which makes it more time consuming. And then they have to get non-traditional, the lowest cost loans that they possibly can. So what's the impact? The development timeline is 3 to 4 years. So where it's probably more like 2 years, maybe 2 to 3 with a conventional multifamily development. So who are the developers? We have nonprofit developers. We have a lot of them actually here today, and they're presenting. Are they presenting right now? I can't remember, but they are presenting today. And nonprofit developers are different. They're mission driven. They're run by boards. They typically are able to take care of or work more easily. But I guess I can't say that unanimously. But they tend to have a much closer connection to the social service and supportive services. So often nonprofit developers are more able to accommodate folks who have higher needs than others. They're for-profit developers. Community development authorities also develop housing. Housing authorities develop housing. They also have housing choice vouchers. Does everyone know what a housing choice voucher is? Okay, so a housing choice voucher is something that that you get that our Dane County Housing Authority issues. They're from HUD, and basically a housing choice voucher. If I get a housing choice voucher, I can go to my landlord, and when he says or she says, you know, your rent is $700, this allows me to pay only 30% of my rent. So now this voucher, HUD will cover the rest of it. Okay, so housing choice vouchers are very helpful for people who are, you know, at our lowest income levels, because even when you're partnering, and often they partner, the Housing Authority partners with these developers. If they partner with the Dane County Housing Authority, the Housing Authority can then bring 5 or 7 or 8 of these vouchers to the development, which allows that development to include folks who are at the very low income end of the spectrum, because they have vouchers that will help make the development work financially. And also help the most vulnerable in our community. So a housing choice voucher is given by your county's housing authorities. Benefits. What are the benefits? Job creation, right? Employee retention. Our former director, Wayman Winston, had a great saying that houses where jobs go to sleep at night. So it's really important that we have houses so people can live in them, people can have jobs, and employers can have employees. Aging in place has been a huge part of this discussion with the Dane County Housing Initiative lately in the past few years, and it's really critical. Someone came to me from a community not too long ago and said, you know, I've lived in this community for a very long time, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay the taxes on my house, and I have no place to go. They gave their entire life, this woman and her husband gave their entire life to this community. She actually was in her 60s, and she was running a daycare, and she practically raised the entire community. And she said, you know, the only thing I can find is like 2 counties away. And, you know, it felt really bad. I mean, she was, you know, in tears, and she said, you know, this is what I worked my life for, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to stay here. So affordable housing is really, you know, aging in place is something that I hear a lot about, people needing to move out of their homes, but not wanting to move, you know, to another state or you know, another county, and wanting to be in the town that they grew up in or the community. Increased tax base, housing for workforce, as we mentioned, reduces racial disparities. Disproportionately, people of color suffer from housing struggles and housing insecurity than as do whites. More efficient use of land and infrastructure. So if you're building, you know, a multifamily development, 40 or 50 units, it goes on. You can put that on 2 acres. 40 or 50 units of a subdivision is huge. It requires much more infrastructure, much more road, much more cost to the municipality than would a more efficient use of space with a multifamily unit. Housing for families and revitalization, downtown or otherwise. So the drawbacks, it's a steep learning curve. I really commend you guys for coming in. This is a big topic. I happen to be fascinated by it, but there's so many different parts to it, and yeah, it's kind of complicated. So yeah, so a steep learning curve. It's more work. If you're interested in doing this for your community, capacity building, it takes a while. It takes a long time to develop the interest, the support, the understanding to actually get a conversation going in your local community. I think that change is hard, right? Change is uncomfortable. I know that, you know, a lot of people that I talk to are like, you know, we don't want our community to change. We like everything to be the way it is. And I get it. I understand. I totally understand. Change is hard. But we're faced with this reality that, you know, I don't think anybody can fix at this point. When you're looking at $170 a square foot and a brand new house being $340,000, we don't really have any choices. You know, we can start to do, we can do alternative types of things, maybe some pocket neighborhoods, maybe some scattered site development, but it's not going to solve everything. So multifamily, you know, is kind of the future. So kind of coming to grips with that is a really difficult thing, and understandably, you know, people are uncomfortable with that. And I think a lack of understanding about what it looks like, and what it is and what it looks like. You know, when we talk about the housing gap, people are confused. I think because they don't really understand this idea that, okay, so there's this housing gap. Right now we have a housing gap in Dane County, and what it means is that there are people who are living in their houses in our communities already, and they are facing a housing crisis. So the gap is that we have all these people living in communities and not enough affordable housing for them to live in. So they're having to pay 30, 50, 60% of their income just to stay in their homes. So that's the housing gap. We're not building new housing for other people to come. We're building affordable housing for the people who are living here in a very, very unsustainable way. And NIMBYism, people have very strong opinions. Not in my backyard. It's totally understandable. You don't know what you're doing, like you don't know what it is. You're afraid of it. You think people from like all these other places are coming. It's a very common misunderstanding that a lot of people have. And I think, frankly, how we did affordable housing in the 60s was horrible. It didn't work. And people have all these ideas that, oh my God, they're going to build a giant like skyscraper in the backyard and, it's just going to be awful. And, so I think that's a difficult thing to get around. But these are all understandable. These are all, we're all human. And it's something that we all have to, acknowledge and recognize. And I think the first thing or the most important thing to do is, if you're bringing this up or you're starting these conversations, is to really acknowledge when people do have a difference of opinion, or when people are afraid or people are uncomfortable, because when people feel like their opinions are being heard, then they're more easy. If they feel like you're listening to them, then they'll be more likely to listen to you and have a conversation. But it is a conversation. All of this is really based on a conversation. So community tools to address the housing gap. Let me see, what time is it? There are lots of tools to address the housing gap. So the first one you're going to want to actually think about is leadership and communication. Without leadership and without communication, local initiatives are not likely to happen. And leadership can come from anywhere. It can come from you. It could come from your neighbor, you and your neighbor starting to talk. It can come from your local pastor. It can come from your local economic development group. You'll hear this afternoon a number of communities talk about how they started their local initiatives, and everyone does it differently. And of course, Abby's going to talk about what they do in Middleton in just a minute. Financing, financial support. There are lots of things that communities can do to partner and lend a hand to developers who are trying to do this very complicated, expensive thing. Land use planning. So develop policies and priorities in your community that can identify the type of units you want, the amount, the density, the location. That's extremely helpful for developers, and put that into your comprehensive plan. Pre-development costs are typically a quarter of all the total cost of the project. So the question to you would be, is there anything you can, in your community, you can do to reduce developer expenses? Do you have density bonuses or expedited permitting or fee waivers? Does your ordinance allow for higher density development, such as multifamily, or perhaps does your subdivision regulations allow for mixed density, mixed income housing? The other thing is data. Data was absolutely fundamental for starting our conversation here in Dane County 5 years ago. And I suggest, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about finding data or getting data for your community, or how to actually look at it and understand the data. But it's really important to sort of bring it down to the real level. Like, we can talk all we want about this, but how does it actually affect me and my community? How many people in my community are actually suffering from this housing gap? And here's just a chart I put together for Mount Horeb when I was talking to them about the changes that they've seen in their owner households and renter households from the first report 5 years ago to the report that we have recently. Some things have gotten better, some things have gotten worse. Income between, hold on a second, here we go. All right, so change has been, for renter households, people with incomes between 30 and 50% AMI from 2010, there was 15 people, extremely cost burdened renter households, and in 2015 there were 30, so that doubled. But data is just a really great way for, like I said, to ground it and, to sort of tell a story. This provides a framework. This is sort of just like, what's the supply gap for communities around Dane County? And so you could sort of see yourself against your neighbor to say, oh, okay, so this is an issue, and here it's an issue for some people, and maybe it's more of an issue for us. But it just sort of kind of contextualizes the story that we're talking about. One moment. So when we started this 5 years ago, there were 2 communities working in the Dane County, in the city of Madison and Middleton, and now there are 13. So that's really exciting. So this is the housing gap. We have a supply gap, housing gap for 30% AMI of 10,812. Right now, we have more than 15,000 homes and renters in Dane County are paying more than 50% of their rent on their income on rent, 15,000 households. So I'm going to leave it at that, and we're going to wait for questions until afterwards. Okay.
Okay, I'll try to go quickly, everyone. Hi, I'm Abby Attoon. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development for the City of Middleton. And admittedly, when people think of Middleton, the first word that comes to mind is probably not affordable. But for the last 15 years, we have a dedicated group of people and the city as a whole that have been working really hard to solve the affordable housing crisis in our own community. And what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about a lot of things that we've done over the last 15 years or so in Middleton. So you're probably all pretty familiar with Middleton. We're a small city. We have just over 20,000 in population. The split that we have between owner-occupied and renter-occupied housing, as well as single-family and duplex versus multifamily, is pretty similar. Actually, it most closely aligns with the city of Madison. So we're not really a bedroom community of mostly single-family homes. We're more of an urban community with more multifamily housing, and that's been consistent over time. The median value for owner-occupied housing in our city is $310,000. And I would venture to guess that that number has gone up since 2017, which is the last census data that we have available. You cannot find a single-family home on the market in Middleton for less than $300,000. It is not affordable to buy a single-family home in our city. We also have a very low rental vacancy rate. MG&E releases these numbers quarterly, and our renter vacancy rate in the third quarter of this year was 1.48%. Compare that to what HUD considers a healthy vacancy rate, which is 5%, where a renter has adequate choice in the market. And you can see the housing crunch that we have right now in our city. This 1.48% vacancy rate represents 70 units out of about 4,800 units. So imagine being a renter in Middleton and looking for a place to live. You have very, very little choice available. We're also an employment center in Middleton. We export about 8,300 jobs to the region, which means that our population swells during the day. We have a lot of major employers, and then we have a lot of small businesses too. And those actually are some of our biggest advocates for the need for workforce housing in our community because, like Olivia mentioned, this becomes a challenge for recruitment for some of our larger employers. If they can't, if people can't find a place to live near their work, they aren't interested in taking a position. So I've had the opportunity to co-staff our workforce housing committee with our city administrator in the front row here, Mike Davis, for the past 12 years. Mike's been involved even longer than that. Our committee has really been instrumental over time in getting things done. So the role of the committee has really changed significantly over time from coming up with projects and initiatives to a point where they are at now, which is that every single housing development that moves forward in our city, whether it's market rate or affordable, goes through this workforce housing committee for consideration. And we've had a lot of different membership over time, but what is common is that we get a group of people who are really passionate about affordable housing together about once a month to talk about ideas and ways that we can further the development of affordable housing in the city. So on our committee right now, we've got real estate developer, a planner, an architect, someone who works for a social service agency, someone who works for a large employer, someone who's really passionate about environmental sustainability and understands the linkage between that and affordable housing. And then we always have a member of our city council, because it's really important to get buy-in from an elected official. And so, you know, they're always involved on the committee and part of that conversation as well. So our Workforce Housing Committee was established in 2004. Some of the early roles of the committee were to develop a down payment assistance program, which using Community Development Authority funding, we were able to provide 0% interest loans to 15 households that were looking to buy a home in Middleton but just could not come up with the down payment. They could get a mortgage, but they needed assistance with the down payment. So that was one early project of the committee. We also established an impact fee waiver. What a lot of people don't know about development is that every single new unit in the city has about $4,500 of costs tied up in parkland, dedication and improvement fees, and also impact fees to support public safety. So by having this impact fee waiver in place, we're able to reduce the costs of units that are both affordable and income restricted by about $1,800 per unit, which really helps a lot. We've also had projects where we've negotiated agreements with developers. Mike has negotiated most of these on the city's behalf. We had some property that was city-owned that we were able to sell to a developer for a reduced cost in exchange for the developer's willingness to accommodate affordable housing within the project. We've also had parkland dedication fee deferrals over a period of time that have been done or negotiated in exchange for affordability. Most recently, we've primarily been using TIF or tax increment financing to assist and incentivize these types of projects. In 2015, Dane County released their initial housing needs assessment, and as a response to that, we took a look at all the numbers for Middleton, and they have numbers in that assessment for every community in Dane County, and then we decided it was important that we create a strategy for Middleton, and so that was an initiative of the Workforce Housing Committee. It was adopted in 2015, the same year that Dane County released their assessment. Instrumental in all of that was Kurt Paulson, who's speaking later this afternoon. He was the chair of our Workforce Housing Committee at the time, and he also developed the study for Dane County. So he's been very instrumental in our efforts and lives in Middleton, and we're very lucky and fortunate to have him as a local expert that can help us with our process. And I'm pretty sure he doesn't require sleep, and he'd probably be willing to help all of your communities as well, and I'm sure he's worked with many of you already. So this development just on the bottom of the slide is one of the few single-family affordable housing initiatives that we've undertaken. This is our Amherst Road residential redevelopment project where the city owned the land. We had 10 duplex units. 7 of the 10 were vacant. They were blighted, pretty much by any definition of blight. And the city decided to step in when the property went into foreclosure. We purchased it, we put out a request for proposals, and we got some different proposals for different types of affordable housing, and that was one of the key factors in evaluating the proposal. So 10 blighted duplexes transformed into 10 affordable single-family homes. One of the lots was dedicated to Habitat for Humanity, and that was a requirement that we negotiated with the developer. And this is one of my favorite projects. I have a very good friend who lives in one of these units, and it has really transformed the neighborhood. And the people who live in these homes, they all know each other. They share like a backyard. They're all different ages, and it's really turned out to be quite a successful project. So in our workforce housing strategy, the primary goal is to encourage compact development in a mixed income community where people who work in Middleton are able to afford to live in Middleton. Olivia went over many of the reasons why this is important. The city of Middleton has a very active sustainability program as well. So if you think of the implications of people having to drive a long distance to get to work and traffic congestion and how that can impact the quality of life of an individual. If you spend 45 minutes on a highway each day to get to work, that's 45 minutes each way that you don't have with your kids in the evening, or that you can do other things that you enjoy. I also mentioned the chamber connection. Middleton's Chamber of Commerce has been a solid supporter of affordable housing over time, and having the support of the chamber as well as the school district has really gone a long way to help encourage projects in our city. So using the Dane County Housing Needs Assessment number, Jacob mentioned the 295 on the video. Our city adopted a goal to increase Middleton's supply of affordable housing by at least 295 units in the next 3 to 5 years, which we're upon that time frame now. We're 2019. And we haven't quite met the goal of getting to 295. You can see that there are five developments that have contributed to that. 2 are Jacob Klein's projects, or actually, I'm sorry, 3 are Jacob Klein's projects, and I know Danny Fable is here too and has been heavily involved in these. And then we also had 2 developments where the city was the sole source of support to create affordable housing units. So the good news is we've increased affordable and income restricted units over that time period by 180. The bad news is under that same calculation of the housing gap based on Dane County's updated report from 2019, the same calculation, it's only increased. So the need in our community is just continuing to increase, even though we have really made some great strides in the last 3 to 5 years. So this is verbatim from the updated housing needs assessment. Middleton added nearly 1,000 residential units. The number of rental units affordable for the lowest income bracket declined, even though the number of families in that lowest income bracket increased. Professor Paulson noted that these patterns and trends perfectly represent the complexities of Dane County's housing market over the years, continued population growth at all income levels, significant increases in supply, but still not enough units constructed. So our strategy includes 14 policies to increase the supply of affordable housing. The primary tool that we have been using is tax increment financing to help either serve as a match for other funding sources, or we have, like I mentioned, also been the sole source of support in some otherwise market rate projects. This is one of those developments. This is called Cardinal Row Apartments. If you're familiar with Middleton, it's on the corner of Parmenter and Lee Street. It was formerly a metal Quonset hut type building that was used for a cleaning supply company. They decided to move their business. This property was redeveloped into 16 units of housing affordable at 50%, or I'm sorry, 16 units of market rate housing. The city approached David Mazer, who was the developer, and we said, what would you think about at least encouraging some units within your development to be affordable? And at that time, the target we were kind of looking at was 10% of the units, so 1 or 2 units. It's a pretty small project. In this case, we were able to incentivize 1 unit affordable at 50% of AMI, and it was a 3-bedroom unit, and the reason for that is it's right next to our high school, and it also is right next to a community park. It was not an inexpensive prospect to go in without any other source of funding, and we basically have a calculation that we do that makes up the difference between what is market rate and what is affordable. And this is over the life of the TIF district. The TIF incentive for this project was $137,000 in developer finance TIF. So that means the developer borrows the money, the city pays it back over the life of the TIF district using tax increment. Another development, it's right next door to Meadow Ridge Apartments, which was shown on the video. This is Oak Ridge Senior Apartments. The developer is Jacob Klein. This is a low-income housing tax credit project, so a much higher percentage of the units here are affordable and income restricted. We love the location of this development. It's between Parmenter and the Beltline, and it's an area that we're gonna see continued revitalization and redevelopment over time. It's also proximate to a future planned Meritor campus, and we know that a lot of healthcare workers need affordable housing, and so having those two in proximity is really key. In this development, 70 of the 83 units are affordable at 60% of AMI or less, and many are at much lower targets than the 60%. 18 of the units are reserved for tenants with disabilities or veterans. And then my favorite part, 8 of the units are reserved to meet the needs of grand families, so that's grandparents raising their grandchildren. The TIF incentive for workforce housing on this development was $395,000. So you can see there's a big difference between the city deciding to step up and go it alone without any other matching sources of funding and piggybacking on a LIHTC project if you're lucky enough to score, to have a developer in your community that wants to develop LIHTC and can score highly enough in order to get the tax credits awarded. So that's not always going to be the case, but if you are lucky enough to get that kind of development in your community, that's really key. Some of the future considerations that the City of Middleton is working on related to housing, we're in the process of updating our comprehensive plan for the city, and these are some of the goals in our comp plan. We want to continue to support infill development. We've been solidly doing that for decades now. We want to include missing middle housing types, both in new subdivisions and in retrofits to existing subdivisions. So missing middle could be anything from a duplex unit or a triplex or a fourplex, all the way up to, I think this is like a 4-story multifamily housing building. And the great thing about missing middle housing is that it can really blend well into an existing neighborhood, and it kind of helps make the transition between single-family homes and higher density development. We also plan to embrace transit-oriented development, especially along major roads like University Avenue, Century Avenue. This is really important too because we want to have really good and viable transit options. And so the more that we can densify our major transportation corridors, the more likely we are to be able to support things like bus rapid transit in our city, which we're really interested in. Another thing that we're working on is revising the housing ordinance to allow accessory dwelling units and also multifamily housing that makes efficient use of the land. We plan to amend our zoning ordinance to reduce the minimum lot size for residential. Right now, for a single-family home, it's 7,200 square feet, but most of our new subdivisions are coming in and requesting a rezoning to Planned Development District, or PDD. The reason for that is that our code is from 1984, and it's kind of outdated. The new trend in single-family homes even is, smaller lot sizes, homes that are closer together, and then larger shared green spaces rather than your own big private backyard. We also need to increase the maximum building height for multifamily homes. And probably nobody could speak to this better in this room than Mr. Anthony Gray, who is doing a project in Middleton called the Addy, that got unanimous support at our Plan Commission meeting on Tuesday night, and I fully expect we'll also get good support at our council meeting for its final approval next week. But what we have for maximum building height right now, it's outdated. Right now, we say the maximum multifamily height is 3 stories or 35 feet, whichever is lower. But most new multifamily buildings that are coming forward are having to get that PDD zoning so that they can go higher. So we have 4-story and 5-story apartments all over the city, but they are requesting rezonings in order to get to that point. We also on Tuesday night had a proposal for a 14-story apartment building, and that's in the Greenway Center neighborhood, close to a lot of jobs and in a much higher density area. I just included 2 links here. One is to the Dane County Housing Needs Assessment. Actually, I think I accidentally put the 2015 version, but I bet Olivia's got the new one all over the DCHI website. And then also our workforce housing strategy in Middleton. Thank you.
Well, I think I promised that you would leave this session with loads of information, and I think they delivered. I wish that we had more time, but I was told earlier that we have a hard stop after this session. So I think if you have questions that you'd like to ask, you can certainly find Abby or Olivia. And all the slides, the materials that you see today will be available on the Dane County Housing Initiative's website following the summit. So all the information that you've received today will be available to you electronically. So with that, let's give them one more round of applause and head off to lunch.
I'm gonna take a question if they want to ask.
Do you want to take a question?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to ask a question, yeah.
Okay.
But feel free if you have to
Feel
go.
free to go if you
Yeah,
want to go.
right.
Yeah.
I have a question. The examples that you have shown are very impressive, and I'd like to know how much attention is paid to connectivity, to a mass transit, to these affordable housing complexes.
Yeah, it's a priority. With the affordable housing, the Dane County's Affordable Housing Fund, we had new criteria this year that said the development needs to be within a mile or more than a mile from existing facilities, but is given preference. Especially, actually, we don't have a transit requirement for the Dane County Fund, but the City of Madison does. That is not made it into our criteria yet, but that is a consideration that the Affordable Housing Development Team is thinking about.
I lived in Middleton for a while, and when you consider transportation, it's not just whether it's on a route, but it should also be whether the route is on weekends.
Right, absolutely, yep.
And evenings,
Mhm.
because many aren't. So
Right.
You can commute, but you can't do anything after work. You can't do anything on weekends. You can't get to the grocery store, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's important.
Our project in Middleton unfortunately finished 2 slots out of the money for the Dane County Affordable Housing Fund, which everyone wants to console me by saying that's impressive for a first-time developer, but I'm not sure how being 2 slots out is any different than being 6. What tools does the city have to help close equity gaps in affordable housing developments that are outside of your TID? Your main thoroughfare down University Avenue
Right.
doesn't have access to that primary lever.
Yep.
What else is there?
That's a great question. So if a property is outside of the TIF district, the city by law cannot support, a development in that area with TIF funding. And as every other city in the state is constrained under the levy cap, we have extremely low opportunity for funding any new programs or initiatives, and I'm sure that that's true of all of your communities as well. One idea, and I know Anthony, you are aware of this, but there is a small grant that's available through WEDC called the CDI grant, or the Community Development Investment Grant. The maximum funding amount available under that program is $250,000, but it has to be tied to a mixed-use development, and each city gets one per year. So Anthony and I worked together to try to secure that CDI funding, because initially his proposal had a carve-out for about 1,200 square feet of retail, and that once that retail component went away, it was no longer eligible for the CDI grant. With respect to University Avenue in particular, that area is really starting to show some wear, and our city recognizes that, and we're looking at doing a new and updated plan for that corridor next year. Eventually, when we're able to add property to the TIF, which is years off, we would likely be considering that as the next area that we would really be focusing that incentive on.
Way in the back.
Obviously, the low income housing tax credit has been around for a while now, and I know there are probably properties where the low income requirement's expiring. I looked at that Oak Ridge project and thought 15 years of affordability. How is this sustainable? So can you talk a little bit about what the plan is for ones that are expiring now? I know that was mentioned in one of the talks this morning, as well as in future future, what do we do and what's the plan?
That's a great question. One tool that was recently made available to cities with TIF districts is that at the end of the TIF district, you can use all the available increment for a period of 3 years to support affordable housing in your city. So we're keeping a close eye on our 2 TIF districts and their closure period because that could be an opportunity for us. There also is a publicly available list for any city that's worried about a LIHTC project expiring off, and we keep a close eye on that. I think the first one that we have coming up will be Parmenter Center Apartments on Parmenter Street, Parmenter Circle, I'm sorry. And we're keeping a close eye on that because at that point in time, once the credits are expiring, there is an opportunity for the city to work with the property owner and try to extend the life of affordability. We haven't had to do it yet, but it's something that we're looking at, and we're trying to get creative about what the options might be at that point in time.
And I do think there's a potential role for nonprofit developers to step into this area. It's something that a lot of people are looking at and talking about because it's sort of like the big elephant in the room. What happens when, these projects phase out?
When the LIHTC expires, or the period that they're locked into it expires, does the city or the town who's sponsoring that have the option to buy it at a certain preset price? Is that
No.
locked into any of your contracts?
No, I mean, yeah, no, Tom, do you want to answer that?
The law provides now with the low-income housing tax credits that there's 2 periods. There's the first 15-year period. That's when a tax credit investor is involved in the property. The property has to be kept affordable for 30 years.
That's the case now, right?
So the question is, who will own the property from year 16 to 30? And the answer to the question that was just asked is there's a federal IRS regulation that developers that want to exit or investors that want to exit the plan notify WIDA posts it, and then there is the opportunity for prospective buyers to purchase it. There is a carve-out in the tax credit language that allows a discounted price to a nonprofit or a housing authority. And frequently, investors will look at that because there's a huge tax savings in capital gains tax if they can transfer it to a nonprofit or a housing authority. So
That's huge.
a for-profit developer would not be quite so advantaged
Mm-hmm.
year 16, but a nonprofit or a housing authority would.
And I think Common Bond Properties is looking at that issue because they're large enough to start considering these types of things about acquiring or partnering with existing developers. They're a nonprofit, but they're a very large nonprofit in the Midwest region. Final question, and then people need to eat.
Go ahead. Yeah, right there. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Question for Olivia. Data question. I've recently become aware that 50 to 70% or more of land use in municipal service areas is exclusively zoned to single-family zoning. And I'm wondering if maps that illustrate that are available to our community people, and if there is ways that then they can consider some of the upzoning like we're doing in Minneapolis to do some of this missing middle and cottage court stuff that Tom's group is doing. Is that data available?
I mean, anything can be mapped. We could map it, very easily.
Does it have to ask you?
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Okay,
All right.
thanks.
Well, great. Why don't you head off to lunch, and thanks so much.